Hey guys, tonight we gather around a smoky little fire under a patchy paper lantern that flickers like it might give up on life at any moment. You're old now, knees creak louder than bamboo in the wind, and your sword hasn't left its scabbard in 20 years. But tonight, a circle of wide-eyed kids stares up at you, expecting magic, or blood, or both. You clear your throat, sip from a chipped teacup that smells like it's absorbed 100 years of regret, and smile without showing too many teeth. So, you want to hear the stories? One of the younger ones nods with both hands. Another picks his nose with ceremonial intensity. You lean in close, lower your voice, and begin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Seriously, I want to know who I'm whispering to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't remember your parents. That's the first thing. Not because they died, but because they were ninjas too. And ninjas don't exactly keep scrapbooks. What you do remember is the taste of rice and ash and pain. Pain was everywhere, like a nervous cousin that never left the room. You were 5 years old the first time someone tried to drown you for your own good. Float like a leaf, not a stone, they said. Also, don't scream so much. Your first lesson in balance didn't involve a tightrope. It was a wet log over a river of fish that looked too hopeful. You fell 7 times. The 8th, you learned how to breathe while upside down and possibly concussed. Training was peculiar. You'd be blindfolded at breakfast, slapped awake during naps, and once asked to identify 5 poisons by smell, all before your first cup of barley tea. You passed, barely. The boy who didn't? Well, historians still argue whether he moved to a monastery or simply turned blue. But the most important moment in your entire education? The cracked teacup. It was an ordinary day. The sky was the color of stale tofu. Master Kenzo sat in his bamboo chair, chewing pickled radish and contemplating existence, or at least how to avoid a conversation with his wife. You walked up shaking because your rice ball had a centipede in it, and you needed clarification. Was that a test or a mistake? He didn't answer. Instead, he handed you a teacup, delicate, smooth, and obviously cracked along the rim. Fix it, he said. You frowned. With what? Your mind. Classic Kenzo. You sat with it for hours, stared at it, cursed it, once tried to glue it with chewed mochi. Didn't work. At sunset, you gave up and brought it back. I failed, you said. He took it, smiled, threw it behind him. It shattered like your confidence. You pass. To this day, you still don't know what the test was. Maybe patience, maybe letting go. Maybe he just wanted to break something and needed an excuse. There's a style of Japanese pottery called kintsugi. You fix a broken cup with gold to to show its scars are part of its history. Kenzo didn't believe in that. Gold is too expensive, he once said. Use spit and hope. You tell the kids that now, watching them blink under the flickering lantern light. They laugh. One asks if the crack was shaped like a cat. You shrug. Maybe. A frog croaks somewhere beyond the hut. You sip your tea again. Bitter. Probably poison. Hard to tell these days. Your taste buds retired long ago. It's strange, the things that survive. A cup, a scar, a story, and you. By age 10, you could blend into shadows, balance on plum branches, and write a full confession using only your toes. But you still cried when you stubbed them. One night, during a thunderstorm, you were tasked with guarding a chicken. Not a scroll, not a princess, a chicken. Everything has value, said Kenzo. Except the chicken immediately ran into a ditch and disappeared. You spent the whole night crying into your sleeves and whispering apologies to an animal that may or may not have ever existed. Years later, during a war council, the enemy general was assassinated with a single feather. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe that chicken really was part of the clan. Historians still argue whether the feather death technique was invented by your village or plagiarized from the geisha school downriver. You don't care. You just hope that chicken found peace. The fire crackles low now. A soft ember floats up and fades. One of the girls pulls her blanket tighter. Was it scary? She whispers. You nod. Always. Even now? You pause, sip, look at your old cracked hands. Especially now. Because what they don't tell you about getting older is that silence grows louder. The wind carries names you forgot, and every shadow looks like someone you once betrayed. But you're not here to make them cry. You grin. All right, enough tea philosophy. You want the one about the baby falling off the roof. They lean in. Of course they do. You tap the rim of your teacup with a yellowed fingernail and exhale through your nose. More a wheeze than a sigh, like a flute someone stepped on during a parade. Ah, yes, you say, the leaf baby. The children scoot closer. One munches on a cold sweet potato like it's popcorn. It was me, you add, in case that wasn't obvious. You were barely 2 moons old when the elders tossed you from the temple roof. Yes, the roof. Before they taught you to crawl, they taught you to fall. It was a custom in your village, a shinobi ritual of gravity and trust. A ninja must fall many times before they truly rise, the elder said. Of course, they said this from the ground while you were mid-air. You don't remember the flight, obviously, but you've been told it was majestic. Some say you rotated 3 times like a maple seed. One old woman insists a crow followed you halfway down. One cousin swears you peed on someone's bald spot. There's even a scroll, frayed, dusty, mostly unreadable, illustrating what looks suspiciously like you in a diaper, arms out, descending like a glider of doom. The trick, of course, was the catch. An older ninja waited below with a stretched blanket woven from mountain silk and regret. He caught you, barely. Then he dropped you again, on purpose this time. Better safe than spoiled, he muttered. Historians still argue whether this ritual was an actual survival test or just an elaborate excuse for negligent childcare. Either way, you learned something crucial. You do not control the wind, but you can learn to ride it. Years later, you would throw your own apprentice from a tree. He screamed the whole way down. Didn't break anything, except your trust, because he had the audacity to land like a frog and grin. "I was aiming for the pond," he said. You didn't speak to him for a week. Then he made you tea and bowed awkwardly. You never threw him again. But sometimes, when he wasn't looking, you'd toss his sandals onto the roof. Revenge is a dish best served from above. But back to you, the small, unlucky sky baby. After your inaugural plummet, you developed an unusual sensitivity to air movement. By the time you were 4, you could feel someone walking behind you by the way the leaves shifted. "Wind is the loudest teacher," said Kenzo. "It just never raises its voice." One afternoon, a monk visited the village. He brought incense and bad news. Also, soup. Always with soup. He noticed you balancing on the edge of a well, arms spread, eyes closed. "Why is the child doing that?" he asked. "To understand silence," said Kenzo. "And what if he falls? Then he will listen better next time." The monk never came back. You explain this to the kids now, how your life was shaped by people who thought child safety was a type of dishonor. They laugh. "Did you ever fall again?" "Constantly," you nod, "but with style." There was the plum orchard incident. 12 trees, freshly waxed branches, and one dare that ended with you face down in a rice paddy. There was the river jumping contest. You won, but only because everyone else chickened out after seeing you disappear underwater for 7 full minutes. You'd just found a nice rock to nap on. And of course, the infamous kite gliding experiment. You built wings out of reeds, tied them to your back, and leapt from the watchtower screaming something about destiny. You made it halfway across the training field before a chicken got in your way. That chicken again, always watching. One of the children interrupts, wiping their nose. "But weren't you scared?" You pause. "Yes." A long, honest silence. "Fear is like underwear," you add. "You don't go anywhere without it, but no one wants to see it hanging out in public." They giggle. You go on. "Every fall I learned how to brace, how to twist, how to scream after impact, not before." And then there was that fall. You were 12, a high cliff, a reckless mission to retrieve a ceremonial fishhook lodged in a hawk's nest. You slipped, tumbled, landed hard on a slope of pebbles and moss and one very offended snake. You broke your wrist. You didn't cry, not because you were brave, but because there were bees nearby and you didn't want to attract them. You lay there for an hour, listening to your bones argue. Then Kenzo appeared. He didn't help you up, just dropped a bamboo canteen next to your head. You'll walk back when you're ready, or not. You did walk, eventually, lopsided, angry, but you walked. And that night, under a paper lantern, Kenzo handed you a single rice ball, nothing inside, just plain. A reward, he said. To this day, you're not sure if that was sarcasm or genuine affection. Sometimes, you tell the kids, a plain rice ball is the highest form of praise. The youngest yawns. You see her eyes getting heavy. Perfect. Let me tell you, you murmur, about the time I tried to sneak past my grandmother.
She wasn't my grandmother, you explain, but that's what we all called her, Granny Sawa. The kids lean in. You lower your voice, slow it down. They'll be asleep soon, but not yet. Granny Sawa lived in the northern quarter of the village, where the moss grew thick on the rooftops and frogs held town meetings. She wore 12 layers of black silk, even in summer, shuffled with a wooden cane that made a noise like bones knocking on wood, and smelled like old pickles and judgment. Most assumed she was blind, others thought deaf, but all of us feared her like we feared the tax collector and loose floorboards. Your first mission was to sneak past her front gate at midnight, retrieve a scroll from the plum tree behind her house, and make it back before the temple bell rang twice. Easy, in theory. You prepared for days, practiced your steps in rice paddies to soften your tread, rubbed oil on your knees, slept upside down to train your blood for inverted moments, wore charcoal on your face and chewed mint leaves to suppress breath. On the night of the mission, the sky was thick with clouds, stars barely breathing through. You crept along the wall, fingertips brushing the cold stones. The plum tree waved like it was rooting for you. And then, clack! That cane hit the porch. You froze. There she was, on the steps, sitting, staring into the dark. You whispered to yourself, "She's deaf. She can't see me." Wrong. "She's got nose vision," whispered your partner. "She smells motion." To this day, you don't know what that means, but it scared you into stillness. Granny Sawa turned her head, said nothing, just exhaled sharply through her nostrils, like a bull, a very delicate silk-wrapped bull. You waited. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, carefully, you edged left, toward the tree. A floorboard squeaked. She was up in an instant. "How dare you tiptoe like a clumsy goose?" she shouted, cane in the air. You ran. The cane hit your back with mathematical precision, once, twice. Then she tripped and fell into the garden pond. You considered helping her, but you were 12, terrified, and smelled like mint. You grabbed the scroll, wet, bent, and probably a shopping list, and fled. The next morning, you found your sandals nailed to her door with a note: "If you return, bring better manners." You still keep that note. The children giggle. One of them snorts, half asleep. Another says, "Yes, well, we practiced, but Granny Sawa was the final exam." Years later, when you were grown and had fought in wars, poisoned generals, and climbed sheer cliffs barefoot, you returned to the village. You visited her house, empty now, overgrown with vine and silence. You left a rice ball on the porch and your best pair of sandals, not because you forgave her, but because she was the only one who ever caught you without trying. Historians still argue, you mutter, whether Granny Sawa was once a ninja herself, or just an exceptionally well-armed old woman. There's a lesson here, you tell the kids. Stealth isn't just footsteps, it's timing, breath, intent, and sometimes the humility to know when someone simply has better hearing than you. One of the children raises a hand. Did she have magic? You scratch your ear. Only the cruel kind, like when someone pretends not to see you and then describes your outfit in perfect detail. The fire's getting low now. Shadows stretch long and wide, like old regrets. You glance up at the paper lantern, still flickering, still undecided. Anyway, you whisper, after that fiasco, I needed comfort. I thought, maybe school lunch will make me feel better. You sip again. It's mostly leaves at the bottom now, but that's fine. You're mostly leaves at the bottom too. What I didn't know, you continue, was that lunch was the trap.
School lunch. In other villages, lunch was a break, a warm meal, some gossip, a moment to breathe. In our village, it was a second battlefield, a test disguised as a snack, a rice ball with secrets. You were 13, overconfident, still bruised from the Granny Sawa incident. You thought you knew how the world worked. You did not. That day, you opened your bento box expecting something comforting. Maybe pickled plum, maybe a boiled egg with a little face drawn on it. Instead, you found nothing. An empty box. That was the first sign, but not the only one. Katsu, the kid next to you, grinned like a frog about to do something illegal. Trade? He asked, waving his own rice ball. It was triangular, wrapped in seaweed, and glistened suspiciously. You should have said no. You really, really should have said no. But your stomach spoke louder than your instincts. You took it, bit in, and immediately felt the heat of regret bloom in your nostrils. It wasn't wasabi. It wasn't chili. It was something worse. The elders later called it ghost root, a rare underground fungus used only in advanced psychological warfare. Supposedly, it triggered hallucinations in enemy generals, made them see double, and occasionally confess their sins to trees. Your sin? Taking free food without checking the label. You vomited into a bush and tried to climb a tree that wasn't there. Katsu watched with the calm of a seasoned saboteur. Guess you're not immune, he said. Turns out, that week's lesson was, know what you eat and who gave it to you. Historians still argue whether ninja schools really practiced culinary sabotage, or if ours was just particularly traumatized. Either way, we had one firm rule: never trust a triangle. One boy didn't listen. Daiki, sweet, quiet Daiki with the big ears and even bigger appetite. He ate everything, especially what people left behind. Half-finished dumplings, mysterious soup. That one time he licked a wall because it smelled like soy. Then came the bean paste incident. Someone, no one ever confessed, slipped a slow-acting fart root into his mochi. Not deadly, but legendary. Mid-meditation, Daiki's bowels declared war. We tried to be respectful, hold in our laughter, maintain composure. But he lifted 3 inches off the floor. The teacher's scroll caught fire. The tatami mats haven't recovered. After that, lunch was always suspect. You'd see students poking their meals with chopsticks like archaeologists in a cursed tomb. Some wore gloves. One brought a pet cricket trained to chirp near poison. It chirped a lot. The paranoia ran deep. And then there was the lunchbox. Capital T, capital L. A long, rectangular box wrapped in golden cloth. It appeared once, left unattended on the stone bench near the koi pond. No name, no note, just presence. We circled it like wolves around a trap. It's a gift, said one. It's cursed, said another. It's from the headmaster, whispered a third. He wants to see who's bold enough. Daiki touched it first. Of course. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently. Inside, a single rice ball, white as snow, perfectly round. A glint of silver leaf on top, heavenly aroma. He lifted it, paused, then bit. Time slowed. For 3 seconds, he looked enlightened, like he saw through space and time and into the soul of steamed rice. Then, boom! A puff of powder exploded from the center, blinding half the courtyard. Daiki screamed, staggered backward, and fell into the koi pond, clutching his face. Turned out, the rice ball was filled with powdered pepper, sneezing powder, and a touch of tokidoki root, a harmless stimulant that makes your limbs forget they belong to you. Daiki spent the next hour dancing like a paper puppet in a typhoon. No one claimed the box. But legend says the headmaster kept a hidden journal where he ranked students based on how creatively they suffered. You tell this story now with a smirk, watching the kids try to imagine a world where food fights back. They're giggling, half asleep, but still clinging to every word. One boy raises a hand. Did you ever get revenge? You nod. Not directly, but I did once almost kill a dog. The kids blink. You stretch your back. You'll like this one. It starts with a rope,
2 boiled eggs and the worst mistake I ever made. It was a dog, but not just any dog. You sip your tea. A leaf clings to your lip. You let it stay. This was during your 15th year. You were finally trusted with field assignments, real ones, outside the village. No more sweeping dojo floors or fetching Master Kenzo's fermented pickles at dawn. No, this was a mission. Your task? Eliminate a target. Simple. Except the target wasn't a man or even a spy. It was a dog. Specifically, Lord Nakamura's guard dog, known across 3 prefectures for 2 things: biting things it shouldn't, never sleeping. The dog's name was Arashi, storm, black as soot, big as a calf, tongue like sandpaper, eyes like a tax collector. Your mission? Get past Arashi, enter the manor grounds, and retrieve a stolen scroll hidden in the master's tea hut, quietly, without being seen, without violence, if possible. You spent a week planning, studied wind patterns, measured the courtyard by moonlight, practiced dog sounds under your breath until your throat hurt, and then you cooked the bait. 2 boiled eggs soaked in sesame oil and sweet plum vinegar, Arashi's favorite. That morning, you slipped over the roof like a whisper, dropped silently onto the inner wall. There he was, sitting in the shadows, tail still, eyes open. You tossed the eggs. 1 bounced. He sniffed and barked loudly. You froze. The world froze. And then he charged. You ran straight up the rock garden lantern, over the koi pond, across a drying rack of ceremonial undergarments. Arashi followed like he had something to prove. You made it to the tea hut door, slipped inside, shut it fast, and forgot the scroll. Classic. Outside, Arashi barked like a demon with a toothache. Inside, you could hear the rustle of noble robes as people stirred. You panicked, looked around, spotted the scroll, rolled it tight, hid it inside your tunic. Then, plan B. You grabbed a fan, wrapped it in silk, and placed it on the floor like it was a sacred object. Then, you set fire to the edge of your own sleeve and burst out the door, flailing and screaming about ghosts. It worked. People screamed. Arashi barked louder. 1 monk fainted. In the chaos, you leapt the wall and vanished into the forest. For 3 days, you thought you were a legend. Then, your instructor handed you a flea comb. "What's this?" you asked. You bonded with Arashi. Congratulations, you're now his. Turned out, during the chase, he'd marked you, literally. He peed on your pant leg. And ninja rules are clear. If a dog marks you, it considers you pack, and so do we. You tell the kids this now, watching their eyebrows climb. 1 girl whispers, "So you didn't kill it?" You smile. No, I almost did. But then Arashi started sending gifts. A dead squirrel at your door, a soggy sandal, a torn sleeve from what might have been a rival clan spy. At first, you were disgusted, then touched. Arashi never barked at you again. In fact, during your next infiltration, he helped distract a guard by pretending to limp dramatically, an Oscar-worthy performance. Historians still argue, you say, whether Arashi was a trained spy or just emotionally complex. Either way, he died of old age, buried under a tree that smelled like wet socks. You still leave boiled eggs there sometimes. Dogs, you murmur, understand loyalty better than most humans. The kids are silent now. A few are curled into themselves, halfway to sleep. One is chewing on their sleeve, probably empathizing with Arashi. But you're not done yet. Of course, you add, not all our techniques were graceful. You lean closer. Then there was a scroll, a forbidden scroll, ancient, dangerous, powerful. They blink. You lower your voice to a gravelly whisper. It was called the Scroll of Flatulence. Gasps, suppressed giggles. You nod solemnly, and yes, it was exactly what it sounds like.
The Scroll of Flatulence, you whisper, also known as Futon no Jutsu, wind technique of the backside. The kids snort. One claps a hand over their mouth, trying not to laugh. But you remain deadly serious, because this, dear children, was real ninja history. The scroll was written by a rogue monk, you say, who had been exiled for dishonoring the temple, or maybe for dishonoring the air. Accounts differ. His name was Master Heika, known for two things: a love of fermented beans and an unholy mastery of what the old texts call directional expulsion. Now, of course, today's historians still argue whether this scroll was satire, protest literature, or an actual combat guide. But we had a copy, a real one, ink on aged parchment, bound with twine that smelled suspicious. You weren't supposed to read it, which naturally meant you read it immediately. Your favorite line? Silence is the breath before the thunder, but the second breath, aim it at your enemy. You remember the day you tried it. It was raining. Training had been canceled due to a mongoose infestation in the sparring hall. You were bored, curious, lightly bloated from a bad turnip stew. Perfect conditions. You slipped behind the equipment shed with two classmates, Daiki, ever eager, and little Rina, who'd stolen the scroll when no one was looking. "Let's test Technique 3, she whispered, cloud of unknowing. You squatted, concentrated, and unleashed. There are no words for what followed. The wind shifted. Birds fell silent. A lantern shattered on its own. Daiki wept. Rina bowed solemnly. We have seen the other side. The next day, your instructor held up the scroll, now scorched at the corners. Who did this? Silence. Who desecrated the sacred arts with intestinal improvisation? Daiki raised his hand. He did.
You were sentenced to 1 week of tofu-only meals. Tofu, the anti-ninja diet. No crunch, no energy, no joy. But you learned a valuable lesson. Some powers are too dangerous to wield without preparation, and charcoal tablets. Still, the scroll had its defenders. Master Kenzo himself once muttered, after a particularly tense strategy meeting, "I could have ended that war with 1 bean casserole." We laughed, but only nervously. The scroll was eventually locked in a cedar box, buried under the koi pond. The same pond, in fact, where Daiki would later lose his eyebrows to an experimental spicy dumpling. But every now and then, especially during humid nights, you swear the pond bubbles. Coincidence, you say now, raising an eyebrow? The children shake their heads, wide-eyed, a little disgusted, fully entertained. "I tried to perfect the technique once," you continue, years later, as a prank. You were infiltrating a rival temple, disguised as a monk. The mission? Steal a ritual bell clapper believed to contain encoded battle plans. Why? No one remembers, but orders were orders. You planned to clear the meditation hall with a stealthy cloud of distraction. But something went wrong. Too much cabbage, not enough rice to anchor the spirit. Instead of distraction, you triggered evacuation. 17 monks fled barefoot into the rain, chanting purification sutras. A dog barked for 12 straight minutes. You retrieved the bell clapper, but you were never sent on a monastery mission again. That, you say, is what we call a tactical miscalculation. One of the older kids, eyes heavy with sleep, mumbles, "Did it smell bad?" You lean close. "Imagine betrayal," you whisper. Now imagine betrayal wrapped in an old sock, soaked in vinegar, left under a sunbag. That's what it smelled like. A pause. Then a wave of giggles. But it fades quickly. The fire's a faint glow now. The lantern sways gently. A moth circles, giving up halfway. You stretch your back again. "Of course," you say, "every ninja must face death eventually. Some of us, more than once." You tap your chest. "I died once, briefly. It wasn't dramatic, but it was in a latrine pit." They stare, half shocked, half asleep. You smile faintly. "Want to hear about it?" They nod slowly. Of course they do.
Yes, I died once. Just for a little while. Long enough to matter. The kids don't speak. Even the rowdy ones are still now, their tiny faces flickering in the lantern light like painted masks in a shadow play. It happened during the rainy season, when the frogs sang louder than monks, and everything you touched was either damp, moldy, or mysteriously both. You were 16, still trying to prove something to your instructors, to your clan, maybe even to yourself. The assignment was simple. Map the underground tunnels beneath the western border wall. A job for quiet feet and steady nerves. Naturally, they sent you. Naturally,
You said yes. Naturally, you didn't ask where those tunnels drained. You remember descending, torch in hand, the smell of damp earth and rotting wood rising like bad gossip. The passage sloped steeply, then steeper, then too steep. You slipped, fell, and landed in what you assumed at first was a swamp. But no, latrine, an old one, forgotten, abandoned, or rather, abandoned by humans. You came to your senses underwater, screamed, took in a mouthful of history's worst stew, scrambled upward, slipped again, then blacked out entirely, your last thought being, "This is not how a ninja should die." And for a while, there was silence, soft, weightless, not cold, not warm, just empty. And then light, pain, and Dikey. Yes, him again, covered in leeches, holding your ankle with both hands, sobbing something about, "Don't you dare make me write the report." He'd followed your trail, found your torch, smelled your shame, dragged you out. You coughed a lot, spoke fluent gibberish for 3 hours, lost your sense of smell for a month. When you returned to the compound, Master Kenzo said nothing, just handed you a clean robe and a sprig of mint. You asked, "Did I pass?" He replied, "You passed through something, certainly." Historians still argue whether what happened that day qualifies as temporary death or just a prolonged episode of nausea. You've stopped caring. What matters is this: when you emerge from filth, even moonlight feels holy. After that, you walked lighter, not out of grace, but fear. You knew now what was under your feet. Your nickname became Mizumaru, water circle. Kind of poetic, kind of gross. You didn't mind. But the experience left a scar, not on your body, but in your sense of smell. To this day, fermented bean paste makes you twitch. You can detect spoiled tofu from 50 paces, a useful skill, surprisingly. And there was one more thing. You were different after. You slowed down, listened more, started asking questions before following orders. Not great for upward mobility in the ninja world, but better for staying alive. So, you say to the kids, who are now lying on their sides, bundled like sleepy dumplings, don't be in such a rush to descend into things you don't understand. Some tunnels don't want you back. One girl whispers, "But you did come back." You smile, barely, and then you smirk, eyes twinkling. Of course, that wasn't my most embarrassing mission. They perk up again, like flowers catching the last sunbeam. That would be the Silk Ponty incident, involving 3 decoys, a koi pond, and the shogun's favorite incense. A pause. One kid gasps, another clutches a blanket dramatically. You lean forward. Want to hear it? Of course they do.
This one, you say, nearly got me expelled, exiled, and possibly promoted all at once.
It was spring, which in shinobi terms meant infiltration season. The shogun's court was hosting a flower viewing gala. Peach blossoms, court music, poetry contests, and, more importantly, drunken bureaucrats who occasionally said things they shouldn't near paper screens. Your assignment? Infiltrate the estate. Steal a coded message hidden in the shogun's wife's undergarments. You pause for effect. Let that marinate. The kids blink. Someone whispers, "What?" You nod gravely. Yes, her under things. Now, let's be fair. This wasn't perverse. This was espionage. The code was embroidered into the silk lining of her most private wardrobe. A common tactic in high circles. Who checks a lady's kimono hem for troop movements? Your mission was to retrieve the garment without detection. Ideally, without ever setting eyes on the woman herself. Naturally, it went very wrong. You infiltrated the estate using the koi pond route, standard procedure. Waded waist-deep in moonlit fish water, then tiptoed through a vent shaped like a cherry blossom, all very elegant. You reached the outer chamber of her dressing room just after midnight. Soft candlelight, the smell of sandalwood, a servant dozing with her head on folded robes. And there, folded on a bamboo rack, the garment. Pale lavender silk, red stitching, tiny embroidered characters dancing along the hem like ants spelling secrets. You reached for it and knocked over a jar of perfume. Boom, crash, jasmine oil everywhere. The servant bolted upright. You panicked, grabbed the garment, and dove straight into a barrel of ceremonial bath water. From the bottom of the barrel, you heard voices, footsteps, the shogun himself approaching. You made a decision. Play dead. You floated, limp, expression serene, eyes barely cracked open. The shogun peered into the barrel, paused, then muttered, "We need to clean this tub." He turned and left. You exhaled. Mistake. The bubbles gave you away. A monk screamed. You leapt out, soaked and half-dressed, and darted into the hallway like a carp possessed. You don't remember much after that, just flashes, knocking over a calligraphy stand, scaring a noblewoman into a bonsai display, tumbling through a curtain onto a man reciting love poems to a tree. Eventually, you fled via the roof, slipped, fell into the koi pond again. Arashi, yes, that dog, was waiting. He barked once, then wagged. Traitor. Back at headquarters, you presented the undergarment, soaked, wrinkled, slightly scented with fear. Your instructor blinked. You actually did it? You nodded. He examined the stitches. These are decoys. You nearly collapsed. There were 3 pairs, he continued, each with a different code. 2 were traps. Let's hope you picked the right one. You hadn't. You spent the next month translating fake coordinates that led to a swamp full of leeches. Kenzo never let you forget it. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether the real code was ever retrieved, or if it was all a prank to humble me. The children are barely awake now, murmuring in half-dreams. But that's the thing about being a ninja, you continue, voice softer. You think you're in control, and then life slip something ridiculous into your mission briefing. You stifle a chuckle, and sometimes it's underwear. You glance at the fire. One ember winks out. Of course, you whisper, not all disobedience ends in disgrace. Sometimes it makes you a legend. A pause. You lean in once more. Let me tell you, you say, about the time I betrayed the clan for a cat.
I betrayed the clan once, whisper. Technically, you pause. It was for a cat. No dramatic music, no rooftop duel, just fur and meowing and a choice. You were 17, finally entrusted with delicate assignments, solo missions. You wore your black robe like a badge of honor, creased, pressed, and slightly perfumed because Daiki dared you. Your task? Deliver a coded scroll to an agent in the next province. No detours, no distractions, strict time window. No eye contact with anyone unrelated to the mission. It was raining, of course. You took the East Forest path. Narrow, quiet, wet leaves slapping your forehead every third step. That's when you heard it. A cry, small, reedy, sharp. Meow. You froze. In the roots of an old cedar, half submerged in mud, was a kitten, black and white. One ear bent, shivering. You stepped closer. It hissed, then meowed again, louder, angrier, or maybe pleading. You hesitated. Mission protocol screamed, ignore, proceed. Sentiment is a luxury. But your hand moved anyway. You crouched, reached. The kitten tried to bite your finger, then fainted dramatically into your palm. Possibly from hunger, possibly for attention. You looked at the scroll, then the kitten, then the scroll, then stuffed both into your robe. The cat objected to this, loudly, violently. Your chest became a battlefield of claws and paper. You whispered threats. The kitten farted. Still, you moved forward. Hours later, at the drop-off, your contact, a thin man with no eyebrows and an allergy to sincerity, took the scroll with a grunt. Then he heard the purring. What is that? You pulled out the kitten. It yawned. He looked at you like you'd presented him with a pineapple. That wasn't in the briefing. I improvised. He sneezed. It smells like fish. I was robbed by a tanuki, you lied. He accepted the scroll, refused the cat. You named her Shika, deer, because she moved like one and ate like a bear. You brought her back to the village, hid her in your quarters, fed her scraps, taught her silence, failed. Shika had opinions. She meowed during sparring, scratched Master Kenzo's sandals. Once
brought a dead snake into the meditation hall and dropped it onto a sleeping monk's lap. Your cover didn't last long. They summoned you, the elders, the ones who never blinked and possibly shared one single soul between them. You violated mission clarity, they said. I said a life, you said. They didn't nod, didn't blink, just handed you a broom. You bowed, and then they added, "But the cat can stay. She amuses the cook." Small victories. Sheikah lived 12 years, became part of the compound, sat in on council meetings, once peed on a rival clan's envoy. No one apologized. Historians still argue whether Sheikah was a disguised yokai sent to test your discipline, or just a regular cat with a god complex. You're not sure which would impress you more. But that, you whisper, was when I realized loyalty isn't about blind obedience. It's about knowing when to disobey for something worth more. One of the children, barely awake, murmurs, "Did you love her?" You smile. "More than some of my comrades. She never betrayed me, except when I was holding food." You stretch your legs slightly, joints protesting like old bamboo in wind. "Next," you murmur, "was the time we recruited a ninja who thought laughter was a weapon." You chuckle softly. And he might have been right.
Ah, yes, you whisper, the laughing ninja. They all remember him, not because he was strong, or stealthy, or even, frankly, good, but because he was different. His name was E.G. He arrived late in spring, during the peach blossom rains. Most new recruits came silent, bowing, eyes on the floor. He arrived humming. First warning sign. He wore the wrong color robe, slate gray instead of black. Claimed it was a statement. I like to stand almost out. Second warning sign. And during his first training match, when he took a bamboo strike to the ribs, he didn't grunt, he giggled. That was the moment we all knew something was off. Now, to be fair, E.G. was brilliant in his own way. He had a knack for timing, not battle timing, comedic timing. He could make a sneeze sound like philosophy. He once turned a failed cartwheel into a monologue about dignity. Even Master Kenzo, who hadn't smiled since the great sake mishap of 42, twitched at the corners of his mouth. E.G. claimed he was descended from a long line of theatrical shinobi. "We confuse the enemy into paralysis," he said, "then quietly borrow their sword." Borrow. Third warning sign. You were assigned to him for a joint infiltration exercise. Target? A corrupt merchant who had replaced local grain shipments with sawdust. The village was starving. Serious mission. Life or death. E.G. showed up with a lute. "Why?" you asked. "Do you have a lute?" "In case we need to blend in as wandering minstrels," he said. "We're breaking in at midnight." Yes, emotional serenade.
You stared at him for a full minute. But the weird part? It worked. The merchant's guard dogs were unusually sensitive to music. When E.G. plucked the lute strings, they fell asleep, or fell in love, possibly both. You climbed the roof. He distracted two guards by pretending to be a lost poetry student with foot cramps. You retrieved the ledgers. He juggled fermented pears to cover your exit. Mission success. Mostly. The pears fermented too well. One burst mid-air, releasing a stench that lingered in your robe for a week. Still, when the elders reviewed the mission report, they scratched their heads. "Kenzo," one said, "is this theater?" "No," replied Kenzo, "this is absurdism." But not everyone was amused. Some thought E.G. disrespected tradition, that he turned seriousness into satire, that he was dangerous, or worse, unpredictable. And then, one day, he vanished. No goodbye, no trail, no loot, just gone. Rumors spread like tea leaves in hot water. Some say he joined a traveling circus in the north and now teaches monkeys how to fake sword fights. Others say he became a spy for a rival clan, using comedy as cover for treachery. But one version, your favorite, says he infiltrated the imperial court itself, disguised as a jester, and now whispers secrets into the emperor's ear through riddles. Historians still argue whether E.G. was a genius or a fool, a traitor or a prophet. But you know the truth. He made people feel things, laugh, question, breathe. And in a life soaked with silence and blood, that was rare, precious. "You never saw him again?" one sleepy boy asks. You smile faintly. "No, but once, years later, I heard someone laugh in the shadows of Kyoto in the exact rhythm E.G. used when he tripped over his own sandals." You pause, and that's enough. There's a silence now, a warm one. Somewhere in the rafters, an old moth flaps once, then thinks better of it. "And now," you say, voice dipping lower, "we arrive at my greatest humiliation." They blink. "Worse than the dog?" someone mumbles. You nod solemnly. "Oh yes, much worse. Because this one, I involved poison. But not the kind you expect." You glance at your fingers, still stained faintly from herbs. "It began," you say, "with a leaf I couldn't identify and a rash I'll never forget." This story, you begin, starts with confidence. The kind of confidence that blooms right before a spectacular failure. You were 19, fresh off 2 successful missions. You'd retrieved a hidden dagger from the bottom of a sake barrel in the Red District without catching a single disease, or so you thought. And you'd once disarmed a drunk samurai using only a folded fan and a loud sneeze. People nodded when you passed in the hallway. You were on a roll. That's when Master Kenzo summoned you. "Herbal mission," he said. "No killing, no noise. Just fetch the rare red-leafed urayamashi plant from the South Ridge. You bowed deeply, too deeply, nearly pulled something. The Urayamashi was rare, only grew near misty cliffs, said to possess both healing and harmful properties, depending on how it was handled. A clever plant, the kind of plant that might lie to you if you asked it a question. You arrived at the cliffside just before dawn, mist like soup, birds judging you from the trees. And there it was, a small cluster of red-veined leaves nestled between stones. You sniffed them, bit one, spat, bitter, peppery, slight aftertaste of soap and regret. Perfect. You collected a bundle, wrapped them gently in silk, whispered something respectful as you were taught, then wiped your hands on your trousers. That was the moment you doomed yourself. Because what you thought was Urayamashi was not. It was Akairaita, a near-identical cousin plant used historically by angry monks to curse each other with painful rashes. By the time you returned to the compound, your inner thighs felt like they were being slowly roasted by 1,000 tiny blacksmiths. Still, you delivered the bundle with pride. Kenzo took one look, sniffed it, and raised an eyebrow so high it became legend. "This," he said, "is not Urayamashi." You blinked. But this is Akairaita, used by petty herbalists and bitter divorcees. You blinked again. And you touched it? You nodded. With bare hands? Nod. And anywhere else? You did not nod, but your walk said everything. The next week was a blur of vinegar baths, rice starch poultices, and an endless chorus of quiet snickering whenever you entered a room. Daiki made you a special cushion, out of pity or mockery. Your code name changed temporarily from Kaze no Yor, Wind of Night, to Itchy Shadow. Even Shika, your cat, refused to sit on you. Historians still argue, you tell the kids now, whether my rash was the worst case in clan history or merely the loudest. You learned something, of course. Never trust plants that look like other plants. Never touch anything red with confidence. And always, always bring gloves. The children are half asleep now, faces slack with that buttery kind of drowsiness only stories can bring. But one manages a sleepy whisper. "Did they forgive you?" You grin. Eventually, once I stopped walking like a broken puppet. And then, as if summoned by memory, you chuckle. "There was one day," he said, "when I thought, enough. I want to feel important, respected, feared." So you borrowed something, a set of samurai armor. Just once, just to try it on. You lean closer, a twinkle behind your tired eyes. "That day," he whispered, "I became a samurai for precisely 1 hour and 17 minutes, and it nearly killed me."
Now, I know what you're thinking, you whisper to the children whose eyes are mostly shut. Ninjas and samurai are like oil and vinegar. Same bowl, different flavors. We sneak, they stomp. We vanish, they declare. But when you're 19, full of mischief, itch-free for the first time in weeks, and just a little too proud of your own shadow, you make strange decisions. That spring, the local daimyo held a festival in honor of his grandfather's eyebrow. Yes, eyebrow. Long story. The point is, nobles from across the region gathered, and so did suits of armor. Glorious, lacquered, shimmering in the sun like beetles dipped in pride. You saw one, red, gleaming, slightly too big. It sat unattended outside a bathhouse. The owner, presumably inside, soaking, had left it propped on a bench, steaming faintly. And in a moment of terrible inspiration, you said to yourself, "What if, just once, I stomped instead of slipped?" You looked left, looked right, no one. You stripped fast, heart thumping like festival drums, and began the process. First, the leggings, heavy as wet regrets. Then the breastplate, tight across the chest, making it hard to breathe or think. Finally, the helmet. Vision? Gone. Hearing? Muted. Dignity? Questionable. But you stood tall, bold, metallic. You were samurai. For one full minute, you just stood there, posing, imagining your enemies fleeing, imagining Shika bowing respectfully instead of sitting on your face. Then someone shouted, "Hey, that's my armor!" You turned to run, a mistake. Samurai armor is not built for running. You wobbled, tipped sideways, crashed into a stack of bamboo buckets, scattering water, frogs, and one terrified goose. The armor locked mid-fall, trapping you in a kind of noble fetal position. People gathered. Some gasped. One woman laughed so hard she inhaled a rice cake and had to be slapped by a monk. You tried to rise. You really did. But the leg plates had shifted, and the helmet had spun halfway around, blocking one eye and pinching your nose. At some point, a child poked you with a stick. Eventually, the real samurai emerged from the bathhouse in nothing but a towel and a look of confused rage. He stared. You stared back, through a visor you couldn't see through. A long silence. Then you said, "Nice armor." He did not appreciate the humor. You were dragged to the village square, armor clanking with every limp step. Master Kenzo arrived, chewing dried plum and sighing deeply. "This one yours?" the samurai growled. Kenzo examined you like one might examine a cracked teapot. "Unfortunately, I demand an apology." "Of course." He turned to you. "Apologize." "I'm stuck." Kenzo sighed again, louder this time. "Then apologize harder." With effort, you wiggled your head plate off, bowed as best you could, and croaked, "I mistook honor for opportunity, and silk for steel." No one knew what that meant, but it sounded sincere. The samurai left. You were freed. The armor was returned, dented, wet, and faintly smelling of shame. Kenzo said nothing that day, but later, over tea, he muttered, "Next time you want to be a samurai, try standing still for 4 hours and calling that bravery."
You never wore armor again, but you did keep a single rivet from the helmet as a reminder. And sometimes, when a mission was especially grim, you'd tap it once for luck or humility, or both. Historians still argue, you tell the kids, whether that incident qualified as treason, performance art, or just really bad timing. One boy, barely awake, whispers, "Did anyone ever laugh at you again?" You smirk. "All the time. But after that, I laughed too." You glance at the dying fire. Just a heartbeat of warmth left now. Of course, you add, armor isn't always metal. Sometimes it's superstition. You narrow your eyes. "Let me tell you about the time I was haunted by a sandal and the toad that predicted my death." It started with a toad and a shoe. A terrible omen, or maybe just a terrible day. You were 20, seasoned enough to think yourself wise, and still young enough to confuse superstition with insight. The mission was simple: escort a monk through the foggy pass known as Whispering Ridge. Which sounds peaceful, yes, but the name came from the wind and what the wind carried. We had rules about Whispering Ridge. No food offerings, no loud footsteps, and absolutely no wearing unmatched footwear. Naturally, you'd misplaced one of your sandals the night before. Shika, your cat, was the last to be seen playing with it. So, you did what any desperate shinobi would do. You borrowed one from the community pile. Worn, slightly too small, floral embroidery, smelled like pickled sadness. And that's where the trouble began. As you climbed the pass beside the monk, silent, bald, perpetually humming something out of tune, the wind picked up. So did the voices. Now, you're not one to get spooked by whispers in the dark. You've spent nights in plague caves and once fought a man wearing nothing but eel skins and a smile. But this was different. The voices knew your name. They called it in the voice of your childhood friend who drowned. They mimicked Master Kenzo, whispering things he'd never say out loud. Like, you peaked at 17. You pressed forward, pretending not to hear. That's when the toad appeared. Middle of the path, huge, warty, staring directly at you like it knew. You paused. So did the monk. He bowed. The toad croaked once. The wind stopped. The monk turned and said, in the calmest voice possible, "Leave the sandal." You blinked? What? The sandal. It doesn't belong here. Now, you're not particularly sentimental about footwear, but it was raining and the trail was sharp. Still, you took off the borrowed sandal, placed it beside the toad, and kept walking. The monk nodded. 10 steps later, a tree fell behind you. Straight down, clean snap, right across the path where you'd just been standing. The toad? Gone. The sandal?
flattened. You never asked questions, just bought new sandals. But things didn't stop there. For the next 3 nights, strange things happened. First, your left foot itched uncontrollably. No rash, no bite, just a phantom tickle from somewhere inside your bones. Second, you kept dreaming of the same tree, twisted, rootless, hanging upside down. And third, you found the sandal again in your bedroll, soaked and still warm. Now, you're not saying it was haunted, but you did bury it with incense and rice and a quiet apology for wearing someone else's path. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether the toad was a spirit guardian, a cursed monk in disguise, or just an exceptionally judgmental amphibian. You glance toward the children. Even the half-awake ones are silent now, listening with the kind of stillness that only fear or sleep can bring. But that's the thing, you say. You carry more than weapons. You carry stories, curses, and sometimes very judgmental footwear. You let that hang in the air like mist. And that's where the trouble began. And after that, you say, softly, they stopped giving me violent missions. They gave me one final task. You smile faintly, one of peace. You tilt your head, voice thinning like the last ember. I delivered flowers to a dying man I once tried to kill. The fire's barely more than a glow now, like the last breath of a dragon that decided to retire. A child murmurs in their sleep, a soft sigh, and the twitch of a finger. You lean forward, elbows on your knees, and let your voice settle lower, slower, like mist sliding down temple stairs. Yes, you whisper, my final mission. No blades, no poison, just a bouquet of peonies and the weight of history. It was late in your career. Your joints had begun composing their own weather reports. You'd stopped climbing rooftops and started noticing birdsong. You were, dare I say, almost peaceful. And then a name resurfaced. A name you hadn't heard in years. Hirotada, a rival ninja from the eastern province. You had once hunted each other across rooftops, fields, and once, memorably, through a noodle shop during lunch rush. You both survived that encounter only because neither of you could resist finishing the bowl before resuming hostilities. He had been clever, quiet, sharp-eyed, not cruel, but committed. You tried to kill him 4 times. He returned the favor, twice with flair. And now, he was dying, of old age, not steel, in a monastery high in the hills, the same place where you once left a message carved in the bark of a plum tree. Next time, don't miss. Word came quietly. He requests a flower, not an apology, not a duel, a flower. You packed slowly, chose the peonies yourself, pink and white. Their scent always reminded you of spring after a hard winter. You traveled alone, no disguise, no mission scroll, just you, a bundle of petals and too many thoughts. The monastery was silent. He was smaller now, shrunken, eyes cloudy but still sharp behind the mist. "You look old," he said, smirking. "You look dead," you replied. A pause. Then laughter, dry, real. You sat beside him. Neither of you spoke for a long time. Finally, you placed the flowers in his hands. He held them like they were made of glass and forgiveness. "I tried to kill you," you said. "I remember," he whispered. "But you were too polite about it." You chuckled. He coughed. And then, without looking at you, he said, "Thank you for not finishing the job. I liked my extra years." You didn't reply, didn't need to. He died the next morning. You stayed for the burial, silent, hands folded, thinking about every time you could have changed history and didn't. Historians still argue whether you went out with honor or just with flowers, whether mercy is failure or evolution. You don't argue anymore, because sometimes the cleanest strike is the one you don't deliver. You return to the village with nothing in your hands. No scroll, no blade, just peace. They didn't throw a celebration. They just gave you a new room, one with a view, and slightly softer tatami. Eventually, they stopped sending you missions. Then they stopped asking for advice. And then one day, they started sending the children to you, with their questions, their scraped knees, their endless, impatient curiosity. Were you a killer? Did you ever fight 10 people at once? Is it true you once disappeared in a cloud of bees? You told them stories, sometimes true, sometimes not. Because you see, a ninja's final duty is to pass down imagination. And that, you say now, is why I'm here with you. They don't answer. They're asleep, all of them. Tiny bodies in blankets, breathing soft as reeds in wind. You nod to yourself, then glance toward the door. The wind moves outside, just a little, and you say quietly, to no one in particular, "There's one last thing I want to tell them." You fold your hands, and that is what the wind still whispers.
They say the wind forgets, but I found it only stores things. It holds them until someone listens. You sit still. The children sleep. Their breathing rises and falls in waves like rice paddies under moonlight. You want to know what the wind whispers? You ask, mostly to yourself now. It whispers everything we forget to say out loud. That we were afraid. that we were proud, that we loved and failed and still kept walking. The wind carries the first shout of a child learning to fight, and the last breath of a warrior who chose not to. It carries the names of those we lost, and the names we never shared. It carries the rustle of your first scroll unrolling, and the quiet thud of a mistake you didn't have time to fix. And sometimes when you're very still, when the tea is cold and the lantern flickers once for no reason, you'll hear it say, "You did your best, even when it wasn't perfect." You shift slightly, your knees crackle, you don't mind. "There was a time," you whisper, "I believed we disappeared when we died, like smoke, like blades falling into rivers. But now you think maybe we live on in the way a footstep leaves the grass bent, not broken, just pressed into memory. And if someone walks the same path again, maybe barefoot, maybe afraid, maybe they'll pause and say, "Someone was here. Someone did this once." You look down at the children, so many tiny chests rising, so many fists unclenched in sleep. Your voice softens more. Someday you'll leave this room. You'll walk roofs I never saw, hide in forests I only dreamed of. You'll eat terrible food and maybe get famous for something absurd, like throwing a radish with perfect precision. A faint smile touches your lips. But if you ever feel alone, listen. Your hand lifts gently, as if feeling the air. The wind knows your name, even if you forget it. And with that, you lean back, close your eyes, and let the story go. Wind down, 300 words. And now, let's leave the story behind. Let the fire go out completely. The room is dim and cool, and the wind outside is no longer whispering, just breathing, slow, gentle. The children in the room are asleep. One has drooled onto their sleeve. Another is hugging their blanket like a rice bundle. Even Sheikah the cat, yes, she's still around somehow, is curled in the corner, dreaming of fish and insubordination. And you're not a ninja anymore, not right now. You're just a person in a quiet room, hearing the echoes of a life once full of shadows and laughter and mistakes that turned into wisdom. You don't need to carry the stories anymore. They've settled, like dust, like snow, like old memories that finally found a place to sleep. Your shoulders are lighter now. The night is quieter. The past is far away, and that's all right. Because right here in this hush, you are safe, carried, remembered. You did enough. You learned. You laughed more than you should have, and less than you deserved. You were brave in ways no one saw. And now, it's time to rest. Let your eyes drift. let your breath slow. And if you hear the wind tonight, don't be afraid. It's just someone remembering you. Sweet dreams.